So recently I made a video talking about some of the disturbing content that DC puts out, and unfortunately this is a problem that's not unique to DC. Comics have a concerning pattern of mishandling their darker themes, to the point where they practically excuse some pretty heinous acts, along with victim blaming. And this time I want to focus on the Marvel side of things. And like with that first video, I'm going to give a content warning before I get into it. The topics covered in this video are pretty intense, and unfortunately are not handled with the care they really needed to be. I figured the best place to start would be Avengers number 200, one of the most infamous examples of this. This comic had been running from the early 60s, and you think the 200 issue would be a big milestone, and they would do something really special to celebrate it. But instead of being some really cool action-packed fight between good versus evil, it's this really weird grape fantasy, for honestly no reason. Even more concerning is that the comic is clearly being targeted towards children, since the cover not only has no warning for the mature content within the story, but also has an advertisement for a sweepstakes to Toys R Us. In a comic about Carol Danvers giving birth to her own grapist. Fun for the whole family. $3,000 grand prize to Toys R Us. Yeah, I don't know what they were thinking with this one. Really creepy. It starts with Carol in labor while the other Avengers talk about her predicament. Apparently she's only been pregnant for 3 days, and she has no idea who the father could be or how any of this happened to begin with. So we're off to a great start. The Avengers do think that it's weird, but for the most part, they're just congratulating her and being really excited about this new birth. Meanwhile, Carol's pretty horrified and doesn't want anything to do with this child, pretty much disowning him immediately. But to make things weirder, the kid starts rapidly aging, and in about a day becomes a full-grown man. He says that his name is Marcus and eventually explains what his deal is. Apparently he's from a dimension called Limbo, and he was super lonely so he wanted to come to Earth, but he can't just travel to Earth because that would cause a rip in the space-time continuum because of comic book shenanigans, don't worry about it. So instead he drags Carol to his universe, because apparently that doesn't cause any problems. Anyway, he tells her that he also kidnapped Shakespeare and Beethoven in order to win her over, but also admits to using a mind control device because apparently Carol didn't appreciate being kidnapped or something. And she was apparently there for weeks before he finally had to resort to brainwashing her. And then he used his powers to impregnate her with himself, and then sends her back to Earth so that way he can be born on Earth. As if this plotline wasn't already disturbing enough, it gets worse. Carol decides that she still has feelings for him, despite the fact that it was confirmed that she was brainwashed. Tony questions this, asking if she's sure, but she says that she's been denying her feelings for too long and should start following them. Except those feelings aren't hers, she's been brainwashed. She literally spent weeks staving off his advancements before he finally resorted to mind control, and then Thor, I guess trying to be helpful, just whisks them away somewhere. Yeah, in this comic, Carol ends up giving birth to her own grapist and then eloping with him. What? What was even the point of this story? Why did they think this was appropriate for children? But also, who asked for this? I mean, these are supposed to be superhero comics, not this creepy grape fantasy drama thing. There was a whole team of people working on this book. None of them thought this might be a bad idea? And needless to say, people were upset. They ended up addressing this a year later, where it turns out that Marcus ended up aging rapidly to the point where he died in only a week, and nothing of value was lost. But with him gone, Carol was able to break out of the mind control, and Carol is extremely resentful of the Avengers for allowing her to go off with him in the first place. And I understand where she's coming from, but at the same time I can't help but blame the writers more than the characters. They should have known this was a bad call to begin with. What did they expect, honestly? Ultimately, Carol decides to leave the Avengers and stay with the X-Men. Even though she's not a mutant, they took her in after they found her. Something similar happened to another character called Mockingbird. Well, not the whole giving birth to her own grapist thing. So, there's that, I guess. But she was also kidnapped, drugged, and SA'd. But where they actually acknowledge that what happened to Carol was wrong, they don't do the same thing for Mockingbird. In fact, they kinda leave her by the wayside. Which honestly leads me to believe the only reason they addressed this with Carol was because people complained, and not because they actually realized this was a messed up storyline on their own. In West Coast Ghost Avengers Lost in Space-Time, it's time travel shenanigans, typical comic book stuff, Mockingbird ends up in the Old West, where she's targeted by someone called the Phantom Rider. He then kidnaps her, drugs her, and forces her to love him. Yeah, it was bad. She eventually breaks out of the mind control, and the two of them fight. It ends with him dangling off a cliff, and she has the chance to save him, but chooses not to, so he falls to his death. But unfortunately, despite the fact that Phantom Rider is dead, this is not the end of him. Because when Mockingbird makes it back to her own time, Phantom Rider is there too, as a ghost. And he haunts Bobby, you know, his victim. Now Bobby is married to Hawkeye, and in this run he has a very strict no-killing policy, which contradicts his other appearances, but that's what happens when you have multiple people writing the same character. They end up having different personalities from comic to comic. Like in Avengers number 200, Marcus said that it was either he kill them or they kill him. And Clint said, sounds good to me, but that's clearly not something he would agree to in this comic. Anyway, Phantom Rider tells him that Mockingbird killed him, which causes a big fight between him and Bobby, due to the no-killing rule, which I think is out of character, but whatever. But he just totally goes along with what Phantom Rider says. Never mind that Clint knows that A, this guy's a villain, and B, kidnapped his wife, and he dismisses Mockingbird when she brings that up. Their fight ends with Bobby and Clint declaring that they're going to get a divorce, and Bobby is leaving the Avengers. And to add insult to injury, Phantom Rider's ghost just laughs at them. What a horrible story. Honestly, this is 0 for 2 for Hawkeye. If I had a nickel for every time the Avengers let a creepy grapist get away with it. At least this one didn't come with a sweepstakes to Toys R Us. To make all this worse, this ended up getting retconned decades later in 2016. You'd think if they were going to retcon this, they would probably just make it so this never happened to begin with. But instead they chose to have it that Mockingbird and Phantom Rider actually had a consensual relationship, meaning that she cheated on Hawkeye while they were married. But oddly enough, they only retconned the part where he drugged and R-worded her. They kept her letting him fall off a cliff, which technically means she let him die for no reason. I guess that's one way to get out of a relationship, but she could have just broken up with him. I honestly have no idea why they thought this would be an improvement to the original story. It just makes Bobby look like a monster. And frankly, I think it's character assassination. They also say that Hawkeye was so distraught about learning that Bobby cheated on him that he coped by making up the story that Phantom Rider drugged and raped her, which is extremely ironic because in the original 1987 comic, Hawkeye refused to believe that story, but now apparently he's the one who came up with it? Right. What's ironic is that when this issue first came out, it got a lot of backlash, not because of the content of the book, but because of the cover, which has Mockingbird wearing this t-shirt that says, "Ask me about my feminist agenda." At the time, people thought it was cringe, and that they shouldn't be forcing politics into these books. However, the implications here are pretty ugly, like their feminist agenda includes infidelity and murder. Like in the book, when referring to the original 80s plot, she says that it's too ridiculous, and that she's always made her own decisions and lived with the consequences of that. So basically it sounds like they're putting what happened on Bobby instead of on Phantom Rider. Like her getting kidnapped in the first place was her fault? Because it wasn't her choice, and therefore if she's a true feminist then it would be her choice? You know, actually I have a lot of questions about your feminist agenda. So when Bobby's written by a man, she gets kidnapped, drugged, and R-worded, and her husband sides with the guy who did this to her. And when she's written by a woman, she gets turned into a cheater and a murderer. Man, she really can't catch a break, huh? It seems like modern Marvel has this lowly opinion on victims, to the point where there's a lot of victim blaming like here. It's like how in Spider-Man and Black Cat the evil men do, where Black Cat reveals that she was R-worded back in college, but she decided not to report it because she didn't want to be another statistic. But now she's just part of the statistics of unreported assaults. She really should report this. And then with Mockingbird, it's like, sure, she's a cheater and she let that guy fall to his death, but at least she's not a victim. It was her choice. I'm sure that's not going to send the wrong message. There's also been a lot of discussion online about how all this is pretty disrespectful to actual victims, and just kind of the conversation around SA in general. But comics don't have the best reputation when it comes to this subject. They really like to use it just for plot points and drama. and then kind of sweep it under the rug. In Hulk Future Imperfect, Hulk's neck is broken so he can't move, and then he's assaulted by a woman who says her name is Betty, which is the name of his dead wife, and he begs her to stop and leave him alone. Also, Betty ended up pregnant because of this, so that's horrifying. And then there's Thor, who's been brainwashed and R-worded multiple times, actually. They also did a retcon involving Gwen Stacy's death, which was a major event back in the day, but here they made it that she was secretly having an affair with Norman Osborn, and the reason why Norman kidnapped her and eventually killed her was not to get back at Peter, but to keep her from going public with the affair, and the two of them had twins as a result of this. Needless to say, fans were furious over this because it totally ruins Gwen's character, but it was canon for almost 20 years before it was finally retconned by Nick Spencer. And I could go on, but I think I'll end it here. I think that darker elements, including SA, can be used to tell an interesting and compelling story, but I feel like comics tend to just use it for drama or cheap shock value. And these are supposed to be superhero comics, but sometimes it feels like justice isn't served with these storylines. In my opinion, anyway. Thank you for watching. I know this is darker subject matter, but I think it's worth talking about, since it is pretty prevalent in comics, especially considering the fact that this is being exposed to children, not to mention the pretty concerning messages they're sending with these books. But let me know what you guys think of all this. I would love to hear from you. Thanks again for watching, and a special thank you to our members, Tyrant Carnivore, Shiny Orc Boy, General Bolivar, Depth Charge Media, Samaru163, Gabby Hime, Verdant Range, JVR, Phil C, Taylor Ramirez, Equestron, Norman Sweetcream, Way Beyond Coincidence, Hunter Rose, 80s Nostalgia Guy, Felix Bam, Lucas Geist, Jay Draws, Meowsers, Sky, Philip, Isaac Martinez, Garcia XV Legend, Tobias Weller, Bandito Bane, Mac B909, Dakari the Professor, Jin the Goblin, Todd McCaffrey, Omni Fair, Crimson Phantom, Datadyne Executive, Alto Burrito 9506, Caleb Nelson, Cavalcoach, and Strider Exile. Thank you for the support, and if you want to become a member, you can hit the join button next to the subscribe button. We also have Buy Me Coffee if you want to support us that way, and if you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and that part's free. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye for now.